Many times people argue that because we don't have irrefutable evidence for all of the historical details throughout the Old Testament, then that means that the Old Testament is not historically reliable. But in reality, we actually have a lot more details from where the Bible corresponds with the historical record than one might think. The interesting thing, though, is you have to think about the time gap difference between now and when these historical events took place. The New Testament was written in the first century, which means that there's about 2,000 years between now and when a lot of those books were written. In addition to that, the Old Testament was written from that backwards 2 to 4,000 years. And so as a result, we have a time gap of about 4 to 6,000 years between when the historical events took place and are looking at them now. So let's think about what that might look like if we were thinking about our own house. So today, let's imagine you are out and something happens and your house is destroyed and you come home and decide, you know what, I'm just like not going to deal with this and I'm going to move somewhere else. What from that destruction, how much of your life would have been preserved for other people to find after that destruction? Then think about waiting another 2,000 years. No one has decided to build over your property and it's just laid fallow. Imagine what would be left after scavengers or other people coming and taking things away or animals taking things away. How much of your life would be left after 2,000 years for us to find? That's what we're looking at here. So if you take a look at this pie chart, 90% of what existed in antiquity was lost in antiquity. So that means there's only about 10% left for us even to pull out of the ground. Of what has actually been pulled out of the ground, only about 1% of it has actually been um, researched and able to be published about for us to be able to see and use to compare with the scriptures. And so 90% of what existed is not there for us to find. So just because we haven't found something doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. One such example of this has to do with the Hittites. The Hittites prior to 1906 were not found outside the biblical record. In fact, they're mentioned over 47 times in the Old Testament. And so if they're not a real historical people, then we've got some historical problems with the Old Testament if they created this entirely new people group that never actually existed. Abraham bought his burial cave from Ephraim the Hittite in Genesis 23. One of Esau's wives was the daughter of a Hittite in Genesis 36. David murdered his soldier Uriah the Hittite in 2 Samuel 11. Solomon's wives were from among the Hittites in 1 Kings 11. And God claimed Israel's mother was a Hittite in Ezekiel 16. So notice it's spanning the entire Old Testament here. However, in 1906, Hugo Winkler was excavating at a site in Turkey when he discovered 5 temples, a fortified citadel, numerous monumental sculptures like the ones that you see in the screen share here, over 10,000 clay tablets that have been burned and thus preserved, which shed light on the biblical law code. And as a result of translating these tablets, it was discovered that this was the Hittite capital of Hattusha, and they had been a major military might in their day, one that rivaled Egypt. And so this is really interesting because it shows that the Bible is historically informative. The Bible had information about historical peoples, nations, and events before secular historians. Just because we don't have evidence of something right now doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. I hope this has been encouraging to your faith, and I hope you'll tune in next time where we're going to start talking about some of the particular events in the Bible and what and how they correspond with what we see in secular history. Hope you have a great day.